guys, I'm Tara. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about how you can build your glutes and not your quads. So basically we're talking about how to make your exercises more glute dominant as opposed to quad dominant. And the reason that you would want to be more glute dominant or be able to focus on the glutes is not just so you can make your booty look nicer. The glutes are a really important muscle in hip stability. So it's kind of like the shoulder. So both your shoulder joint and your hip joint are both ball and socket joints. So in your shoulder, people who have a weak rotator cuff, their ball and socket joint isn't going to be as stable. It's kind of similar in the hip. When the glutes are weak, that ball and socket joint, that hip joint is not going to be as stable. So a strong glute helps to keep your hip joint stable. And it's a very common thing that a lot of people do have a weakness in the glutes and that the quads tend to be more dominant. So that's kind of why we're talking about this today. I do have an entire blog post that goes over more detail on why it's important to keep the glute strong from like an anatomical standpoint. So I'll put a link to that in the description down below if you want more info on that. So just to be clear, for today we're talking about your glute max, gluteus maximus. That's the muscle that's going to work in a lot of your exercises along with your quads. So that's the part of the glutes that we're talking about because there are two other parts of your glute muscles. Also to note, we're talking about exercises that work on multiple muscle groups. Like if you're going to do the leg extension machine, that's going to just work on your quads and it doesn't really work on your glutes, so you wouldn't be more glute dominant. So we're talking about exercises that work on multiple muscles, so more like your squats, your deadlifts, your lunges, bridges, those kinds of exercises. Keep in mind that even though we're talking about how to make your glutes more dominant over your quads are still going to work in these exercises just based on anatomy. So let's just take a squat for an example because I think that's the, kind of the most basic one that makes the most sense. So when you squat down, you're going to be bending through your hips and bending through your knees. When you lift up from your squat, that's when your muscles are really contracting in a concentric way and working. So your glutes need to contract to straighten out your hip and your quads have to contract to straighten out your knees. So regardless of what you do, both muscle groups are going to work, but there are tips that I can give you to make the exercises a little bit more glute focused. So let's start by looking at a squat, because this is probably the most common exercise where people tend to be more quad dominant as opposed to glute dominant. And there's a few things that you can change to really isolate this exercise more to your glutes. So when you're squatting down, you want to make sure that you're hinging from your hips, so that you're sitting back in the hips and that your knees are not driving too far forward. Okay, so as you squat down, it's like you're sitting back in a chair and you're kind of sticking your butt out back. You should be able to see your toes if you look down, meaning your knees should not be too far forward, okay? So that's the most common thing that would make someone more quad dominant is if they squat down and their knees start to drive forward too much and they're not sitting far enough back in the hips. That's going to make them more quad dominant. So it would look more like this is incorrect, okay? This is correct, sitting back into the hips. If you're having trouble getting that motion, working from a sit to stand position from a chair can be really helpful, or you could use a bench at the gym. So basically, really simple, what you do is you stand, so you have your chair behind you or whatever seat you're going to sit on. So basically, you're going to sit back into your hips, so you're sticking your butt out, sitting down, and then coming up. Okay, so really focus on it while you do it. So bend from your hips, stick your butt back, sit down, and come up. That's a way that you can practice this motion and then carry it over to your squat. Sometimes I even do this as an exercise with weight. Like I'll take the bar, I'll have the bar, and then I'll have the bench behind me, and I'll kind of squat down, but just squat to the bench, and then come up, because it is also a good way to really activate the glutes. So sometimes I even do that as an exercise. Okay, so for your squats, you want to make sure you're putting your weight in your heels and that your weight isn't driving too far forwards on your foot, because this will also change what is more dominant, the quads or the glutes. So when you squat down, so you want the weight through your heels, and really as you come back up, you want to make sure you're pressing through your heels to come back up, because if you press more through the toes, this is going to shift your weight forward and it's going to make your quads work more. So make sure you're really pressing through your heels. Same thing can go for your lunges. So I'm just gonna do like a static lunge here. So if my weight is gonna be too far forward, like on my front foot, so obviously your back foot's gonna be, the weight's gonna be on your toes in a lunge. But if for the front foot, if the weight is too far forward on the toes, you're gonna be using more of your quads. If you keep the weight through the heel of the front foot, that's gonna really isolate your glutes. And again, it's really important to keep good form, kind of like in the squat. So I wanna make sure my knee is stacked directly over my ankle and that it's not driving too far forward. Another tip is to drop the weight down. If you feel like you're really having trouble keeping your form, or if you're having trouble really isolating to the glutes, drop the weight down a little bit, and then that should help you to be able to isolate the glutes more and be able to focus more on a specific muscle group. Another thing is when you're doing your squats, your deadlifts, lunges, really focus on your glutes working. So focus on your glutes helping slowly lower you down like in your squat, and then focus on the glutes helping you come back up into a standing position. So your mind is what moves your body and what activates the muscles in the first place. So putting your mind to the muscle that you're really wanting to use can actually be really helpful in helping that activation. Another suggestion I have for you is to work on glute activation exercises. So if with your squats, your deadlifts, your lunges, you're really having trouble focusing on the glutes, you might just need to kind of take a step back and work on some glute activation. And I've done this in the past and it really works really well. So the first video I actually made on YouTube is exercises to help with glute activation. So I'm gonna link that in the description down below. I don't even want to see myself in this first video, but I know the information is good, so that's a good resource for you. Also, I have a video that goes over a glute warm-up that I like to use before a leg day to make sure my glutes are activating. I'll link that below as well. That video is also old, but it's actually still the warm-up that I use a lot before a leg day, so that's a good one too. The last tip I have for you in improving your glute activation is to work on a hip hinge. So a lot of people have trouble with this motion, and I've seen this a lot working with patients, working with clients, that people have a hard time doing this motion, and that indicates that you're really not activating the glutes well, but that's okay. Let's work on it here. Okay, so what a hip hinge looks like is basically it's kind of like a Romanian deadlift, or if you're doing a good morning with a bar, it's kind of the same motion that you would do. So basically you're gonna have your feet hip width apart. Your knees are gonna be slightly bent, so you don't wanna lock out your knees. So you have a really slight bend in your knees, and basically you're just hinging from the hips. So your knees are gonna stay stable, so they're staying in this slight bend and not moving, and your back stays flat. What it looks like is this. So you're gonna hinge forward. So my hips are bending, back stays flat, my knees aren't moving, okay? And then I'm gonna come back up, keeping my back flat, keeping my knees in the same position. What people tend to do when they have trouble activating the glutes is they'll try to bend their knees while they hinge, or they'll tend to move their torso or flex their spine, so they tend to kind of arch forward this way. So you wanna make sure the knees stay stable and the spine stays stable, and that the motion only comes from your hips. Okay, so one more time here, you're gonna hinge forward, and then what you wanna think about is on the way back up, really focus on the glutes lifting you up. So keep your back flat, use the glutes to lift you back up into a standing position. Okay, hinging from the hips, glutes activate, lift you back up into standing. So if that's difficult for you, there is a little trick you can use to practice this motion, and you need a broom or like a pole thing. Let me grab mine. Okay, I only have this broom, which I tried to clean the gross bottom off of it. But basically what you do is you're gonna place the broom or the pole along your back. So you're gonna hold onto the bottom of the broom with one hand, and it's gonna be like at your sacrum, at your tailbone area. The other hand is gonna be at the top at your head. So you want this to stay in contact with your head and sacrum through the whole motion. So this is just a trick if you're having trouble, and it's just a good way to assess if you're doing the motion correctly. So again, same thing, slight bend in the knees, gonna hinge from the hips. Now I have the broom there, so I'll know if my spine is moving, and then you come back up, okay? So basically, if you do move your spine, then this will move, so you'll see the hand will kind of float up. So it's just a little trick to make sure that your spine is staying flat through the motion. not going to really keep you from bending the knees too much in this motion. So I do suggest watching yourself do this in the mirror so you can kind of assess based on what I'm telling you in this video if you're doing the motion correctly. So those are your tips to help make your exercises more glute dominant so that you can work on building your glutes over your quads. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. And if you're not already subscribed to my channel, please hit that subscribe button right below me, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye guys.